From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
She misses her siblings, her mom, her dad. She thinks she will go home and find them there.
On August 25th, a bomb destroyed her house. She was the only survivor.
Even now, I can't forget my brother, and I am a grown man. I can't forget my brother. So how could a 5-year-old?
A major new investigation by Amnesty International reveals a bomb that killed 16 civilians in Yemen's capital last month was made in the USA. Among the survivors, 5-year-old Butaina, who lost her entire family in the strike. Then, amidst tensions over North Korea's nuclear tests, 51 countries have signed a new United Nations treaty to ban nuclear weapons.
Today, we rightfully celebrate a milestone. Now we must continue along the hard road towards the elimination of nuclear arsenals.
And thousands gathered in Washington, D.C. to celebrate the life of the legendary comedian and human rights activist Dick Gregory, who passed away last month at the age of 84. Among them, Malcolm X's daughter, Ilyasa Shabazz.
He raised his voice for Malcolm and Dr. King and Medgar Evers and all of the others who were slain by bullies, by bigots, because they could not do so for themselves.
We'll hear the voices of the children of the legends, Martin Luther King Jr., Richard Pryor, Malcolm X, and Medgar Evers, among others. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Trump administration ordered new sanctions Thursday against North Korea over its nuclear weapons and ballistic missile program, promising to squeeze North Korean industries and cut off the country's access to the international banking system. Trump said China had agreed to participate in the sanctions, a potentially major step, he said, since China is North Korea's main trading partner, though Chinese officials declined to confirm whether Trump's claim was true. The new sanctions come after Trump mocked North Korean leader Kim Jong-un as a rocket man during a speech at the UN General Assembly this week, threatening to totally destroy North Korea, a nation of 25 million people. On Friday, Korean state television read a statement attributed to Kim in which he called Trump a frightened dog and a gangster fond of playing with fire.
I will surely and definitely tame the mentally deranged U.S. dotard with fire.
North Korea also said Kim was considering a plan to explode a hydrogen bomb over the Pacific Ocean in response to U.S. provocations. In the Caribbean, the death toll from Hurricane Maria rose to 32 as the hurricane's eye barreled towards the islands of Turks and Caicos as a Category 3 storm. In Puerto Rico, where a local newspaper reported 15 people have died, Governor Ricardo Rosselló has imposed a dusk-to-dawn curfew through Saturday. Island-wide electric and communications blackouts have made it difficult for recovery workers to survey the damage, but parts of Puerto Rico were left underwater in what many compared to last month's flooding in Texas from Hurricane Harvey. President Trump told reporters Puerto Rico had been totally obliterated and said he's planning a visit to the island. In Mexico, the death toll from this week's massive earthquake outside Mexico City has risen to 273. Rescue workers worked around the clock to search for anyone trapped alive in as many as 10 buildings around the capital city. At the United Nations, signatories to the Iran nuclear agreement sought Thursday to shore up the landmark deal after President Trump suggested he's seeking to renegotiate the deal or withdraw the U.S. entirely. This is the German foreign minister, Sigmar Gabriel.
How are we going to convince countries like North Korea that international agreements provide them with security, and in so doing make them commit to further disarmament efforts if the only international example for such an endeavor being successful, the agreement with Iran, no longer has effect?
Iraq's military has launched a U.S.-backed offensive against ISIS in the northern city of Hawija. The UN warns as many as 85,000 people could be displaced by the fighting, and the aid group Save the Children says up to 30,000 children children are in extreme danger. The group's deputy director said children are already suffering terribly under ISIS with food, water, and medicine in short supply, adding, quote, "Now families face a terrible choice of staying put as fighting intensifies or risking their lives to flee on foot for up to 12 hours through minefields and snipers, then wade across a river to reach safety," unquote. In Yemen, Amnesty International is reporting the bomb that destroyed a residential building in the capital Sana'a last month, killing 16 civilians and injuring 17 more, was made in the USA. Amnesty International's arms expert analyzed remnants of the weapon and found clear markings that match U.S.-made components used in laser-guided airdrop bombs. The attack severely injured a 5-year-old child, whose 5 brothers and sisters were among the 7 children killed in the strike. We'll have more on the report and the U.S.-backed Saudi-led war on Yemen after headlines. The New York Times reports the Trump administration's preparing to dismantle rules limiting CIA and military drone strikes and commando raids outside of conventional battlefields. The plan would remove so-called high-level vetting of proposed raids and drone strikes and would allow for the assassination of low-level foot soldiers. In New Delhi, India, hundreds of Muslims protested against a plan by India's Hindu nationalist government to deport some 40,000 Rohingya refugees to Burma, where the Burmese army is carrying out a wide-scale ethnic cleansing. The protest came as India's Supreme Court hears a challenge to the plan, which is backed by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. At the United Nations General Assembly, Bangladesh's leader laid out a plan Thursday to begin repatriating 800,000 Rohingya, more than half of whom have fled to Bangladesh since August 25th. Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina said the UN should set up safe zones in Burma for returning refugees.
We are horrified to see that the Myanmar authorities are laying landmines along their stretch of the border to prevent the Rohingyas from returning to Myanmar. These people must be able to return to their homeland in safety, security, and dignity.
In recent days, Bangladeshi authorities have sharply restricted the movements of Rohingya refugees, telling them they can't leave their makeshift camps, ordering drivers not to transport them and landlords not to rent to the minority Muslims. In India, a reporter covering political strife in the northeast state of Tripura was stabbed and beaten to death Wednesday as he reported on a road blockade by a political party representing indigenous tribal people. Shantanu Bhaumek is at least the 2nd journalist murdered in India in recent weeks. Earlier this month, Gauri Lankesh, a prominent journalist and outspoken critic of right-wing Hindu nationalism, was assassinated on her doorstep. In the Philippines, tens of thousands of protesters rallied in cities across the Philippines Thursday, warning that President Rodrigo Duterte was on the brink of imposing a dictatorship. The mass protests came on the 45th anniversary of nationwide military rule imposed by former dictator Ferdinand Marcos. Organizers pledged that future anti-Duterte rallies will be even bigger.
This is the biggest rally so far of the youth and people, and the rallies are bound to get bigger, and the Duterte government is bound to get more isolated and more exposed amongst the people, and soon will be ousted.
President Duterte has already declared martial law over the Philippines' Mindanao region, and he's threatened to expand a bloody so-called war on drugs that's seen police and vigilantes kill at least 12,500 people since Duterte took office last year. In France, tens of thousands of union members marched through the streets of Paris Thursday, protesting President Emmanuel Macron's plans to roll back labor protections by presidential decree. Macron is looking to give employers more power to set working conditions and wants to roll back pension and employment insurance benefits. Back in the United States, the authors of a Republican Senate bill that would repeal the Affordable Care Act are set to square off Monday evening in a live 90-minute debate on CNN with Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders, who's countering with a universal health care plan to bring Medicare to every American. Also joining the debate will be Minnesota Democratic Senator Amy Klobuchar, who has not endorsed the Sanders bill. In Washington, D.C., 3 children of Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II have asked the U.S. Supreme Court to reject the Trump administration's ban on refugees and travelers from 6 majority Muslim nations. Karen Korematsu, Hali Yasui, and Jay Hirabayashi filed an amicus brief Monday arguing the travel ban violates the Constitution. In 1944, their fathers were litigants in Korematsu versus the United States, an unsuccessful Supreme Court challenge to to President Franklin Delano Roosevelt's mass incarceration of 120,000 Japanese Americans. In sports news, medical investigators who examined the brain of former New England Patriots tight end Aaron Hernandez said the NFL star had the most severe case of a brain injury known as CTE that researchers had ever seen in someone so young. Hernandez hanged himself last April in a prison cell after he was convicted of murder. CTE, which is caused by repetitive head trauma, has been linked to memory loss, depression, impulsivity, and aggression. A recent study in the Journal of the American Medical Association found 111 NFL players whose brains were studied. 110 of them had signs of CTE. In labor news, hundreds of employees of Vice Media have voted to unionize. Thursday's announcement brings the number of unionized staffers and freelancers who work on Vice's website and cable TV programs to 430. In St. Louis, Missouri, hundreds of protesters rallied outside a Billy Joel concert Thursday evening in the latest protest against last week's acquittal of white former police officer Jason Stockley for the murder of 24-year-old African-American Anthony Lamar Smith. The latest protest came after press freedom groups condemned last weekend's arrest of Mike Falk, a 31-year-old reporter for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch newspaper, who was charged Sunday with failure to disperse after police kettled him along with a group of about 100 protesters. A photo of Falk's arrest shows him with his press badge clearly visible on a lanyard around his neck. St. Louis Mayor Lita Crewson criticized her city's police department for its aggressive handling of demonstrations after officers were seen marching in formation while chanting, "Whose streets? Our streets," and after Police Chief Lawrence O'Toole said police owned tonight. Nevertheless, Crewson says she has confidence in the police chief. Hundreds of black students marched into Cornell University's Willard Straight Hall Wednesday afternoon and occupied the building for several hours after delivering a list of demands to the university's president in a protest reminiscent of the 1969 takeover of the same building. More than 300 marchers, led by Black Students United, silently climbed 3 flights of stairs in Day Hall and handed a list of demands to President Martha Pollack, who had met with BSU earlier in the day. The protesters, the majority of whom were black and most of whom were people of color, were responding in part to the assault on Friday of a black Cornell student who said a group of white men called him the N-word and bloodied him by repeatedly punching him in the face in College Town. 2 weeks prior to the occupation, a resident of the Latino Living Center reported hearing chants of "Build a Wall" from a nearby fraternity, Zeta Psi. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. We begin today's show in Yemen, where a new investigation reveals a bomb that killed 16 civilians in the capital Sana'a last month was made in the USA. At least 17 more were injured when their residential building was destroyed in a direct hit. Among the survivors was 5-year-old Butaina, whose photograph went viral in the aftermath of the strike. She lost her entire family in the strike. Amnesty International's arms experts analyzed remnants of the weapon and found clear markings that matched U.S.-made components used in laser-guided airdrop bombs. The August 25th airstrike hit a group of homes, severely damaging 3 of them and killing 7 children, including all 5 of Butaina's brothers and sisters. Coalition airstrikes in Yemen continue to be the leading cause of child casualties as well as overall civilian casualties. The latest finding by Amnesty comes as some member countries of the European Union labeled a motion at the United Nations Human Rights Council calling for an independent inquiry into human rights abuses committed by all sides in the conflict. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has called the humanitarian crisis in Yemen an entirely man-made catastrophe. For more, we go to Washington, D.C. We're joined by Raed Jarrar, Amnesty International USA's Advocacy Director for the Middle East and North Africa. Raed, welcome back to Democracy Now! Tell us exactly what Amnesty found in its report.
So, as you mentioned, there was an attack on August 25th, and the attack garnered the attention of the Arab world. What Amnesty found is that the weapon that was used in that attack was a U.S. laser-guided bomb. And we found that out with collaboration with a local Yemeni journalist who took pictures of the site, took pictures of remains of bomb parts, shrapnels, other parts that that journalists found, and sent it to our teams. And our experts looked into these photos and determined that some of these parts are definitely linked to US-made laser-guided bombs. So it's very significant for a couple of reasons. The first one is that this links the US directly to what appears to be a violation of international law, maybe a war crime that needs to be investigated. And the other reason is that this particular incident is such a high-profile incident that having a documented U.S. role in it will have an effect on how Yemenis and people in the region and the Arab world will view the U.S. role there. It will expose how involved, how directly involved the United States is in the war in Yemen.
Can you talk about this direct hit that happened, who Butaina is, the 5-year-old girl, and what exactly happened to her family?
So Butaina had so much attention in the Arab world because there was a TV interview. Some TV reporter went to the hospital to check on her, and she's a 5-year-old girl who's, just came out of this huge attack that killed 17 civilians, including her entire family. So the reporter talks to her and asks her about her family. She answers with like her innocence. She answers. She says her family went to heaven. She like tries to open her eyes, but she can't open them because she's injured. So she uses her fingers to open her eyelid. And that one picture of her opening her eyelids with her little fingers ended up being this iconic photo. It went viral. It's a symbolic photo of a child seeing the world, like people talk about Butaina's eyes, seeing the world through Butaina's eyes. So it got a lot of attention in the Arab world, in social media, and even in mainstream media. Now, we knew all along that it was the Saudi-led coalition that was behind the attack, because the Saudi-led coalition issued a statement admitting that they hit the house. According to them, it was because of a technical error, and they said they're going to investigate themselves. So, according to everyone who has been following that alleged investigation, nothing has happened. There are no signs that Saudi Arabia or other countries involved in the coalition have been taking any steps towards investigating themselves or holding anyone accountable. And that's why Amnesty International is calling for an international investigation into what happened, into this particular incident, into other incidents that appear to be violations of international law by all parties, including the Saudi-led coalition.
How did you access the shrapnel in order to identify the bomb that killed Butaina's whole family?
A local journalist, a Yemeni journalist, took pictures of the building and went through the rubble and dug out parts of the shrapnels and took pictures of them and sent them to Amnesty International, to our team. So what our team of experts found was a small piece of a computer board, a motherboard, that is linked to guided missiles, so U.S. laser-guided bombs. And they identified that it's 100% linked to a U.S.-made guided bomb. So the information came through the local journalist, and the analysis happened through our team of experts.
Can you talk about the larger role of the U.S., this being one example?
The U.S. is very involved in the war in Yemen, the U.S. is very involved in multiple armed conflicts in the Middle East region. And the involvement, in some cases, are direct involvement, like we have seen U.S. direct bombardment and ground troop involvement in Iraq and Syria and other parts of the Middle East. In Yemen, the U.S. involvement has been very significant through selling weapons to the Saudi-led coalition, also through other ways, such as refueling fighter jets of the Saudi-led coalition, and also providing them with intelligence and targeting information. So there is a lot of involvement there, and this involvement, and that is one of the other points that Amnesty International is making, and we've made this point over and over. This is not only about Saudi Arabia or Emirates or other members of the Saudi-led coalition committing war crimes or violations of international law. The Trump administration, the U.S. government, is also complicit in these violations of international law, including war crimes, because they are selling weapons to countries knowing that these weapons will be used for violations, knowing that these weapons will be used to kill civilians. So that is one of the important angles, is that this is not only an action that we're requiring because of violations of a third party. This actually constitutes a violation by the U.S. government. And the U.S. has to abide not only by international law in this regard, but also by U.S. own law. You know, there are U.S. laws and regulations that prohibit the U.S. from transferring weapons to other countries when we have enough suspicion or knowledge that the weapons will be used for gross violations of human rights or war crimes. So it's a very serious involvement. The U.S. involvement in Yemen is extremely serious. And I think now that we have confirmed that this iconic attack that has killed Buthaina's family, that this attack also resembles or is also an example of a U.S. involvement by supplying Saudi Arabia with the weapons that were used to kill these civilians. I think this should be another, there should be another push to demand that the Trump administration immediately halts all weapon sales to the Saudi-led coalition. This is something that can happen and should happen immediately, that no more weapons is sold to Saudi Arabia or any other members of the coalition, because we have to stop the supply of weapons that are being used to kill civilians.
Can you talk about the resolution that was presented to the UN Human Rights Council by the Dutch calling for a new entity? This was tabled that would investigate what's going on.
Yeah, so the resolution, as you mentioned, was tabled. It should be voted on either next Thursday or Friday. And the resolution has, in paragraph 8 of the resolution, it establishes a new international body that would investigate any war crimes, any violations of international humanitarian law or international law in Yemen for the last few years. Now, unfortunately, the U.S. is not supportive of that resolution either. The U.S. seems to be trying to push another resolution that has been introduced by a number of Arab countries, including Saudi Arabia. And that other resolution tries to reiterate the importance of investigating crimes or alleged crimes or violations through the local and regional bodies. And the idea of relying on Saudi Arabia to investigate itself, it doesn't sound bad as a principle, but it's actually not working. There is no evidence that Saudi Arabia has been able to investigate itself and its violations by itself. And that's why many countries and many international organizations, including Amnesty International, have been calling for the establishment for this international inquiry. So it will be a close vote. If the vote happens Thursday or Friday, it's going to be a close vote. I think out of the 47 members of the Human Rights Council, it's almost split now. And we're all watching it very closely. I'm hoping that it will pass, because having an international body to investigate these war crimes is extremely important to hold individuals and governments who have committed violations, to hold them accountable, and to ensure that future attacks will also be investigated, and any potential crimes will not go unpunished.
Well, Raed Jarrar, I want to thank you for being with us, Advocacy Director for the Middle East and North Africa at Amnesty International USA. Later in the broadcast, we'll look at the nuclear ban that over 50 countries have signed on to, the nuclear weapons ban. But next up, thousands gather outside Washington, D.C. and Landover, Maryland, to remember the human rights activist and comedian Dick Gregory. Stay with us.
Black man with the keys in your hands. Oh, you opened up the way for a new day. The original cool, 'cause y'all know my daddy's so cool. He always broke the rules with the courage to tell the truth. He brought the rhythm, heal our blues. Black man with the keys in your hands. Oh, you opened up the way for a new day. Let me tell you something. From hunger strikes to war on drugs, taking out the corporate thugs. You went to jail 1,000 times, exposing white supremacy crimes. From human rights to eating right, you led the world into the light. A universal God force. Information is your power source. Fire starter, innovator, peacekeeper, magic maker, actor, author, philosopher, comedian, warrior, soul survivor, golden son, freedom fighter, chosen one, living legend, the coolest, yeah. See the world.
Ayanna Gregory, daughter of the late Dick Gregory, singing at Dick Gregory's celebration of life last Saturday. Yes, this is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. This past Saturday, thousands of people gathered at the City of Praise Family Ministries in Landover, Maryland, to celebrate the life of legendary comedian and human rights activist Dick Gregory, who passed away August 19th at the age of 84. In the early 60s, Dick Gregory became one of the most popular comedians in the country, paving the way for generations of African-American comedians and performers. He was the first African-American comedian to sit on the couch of The Tonight Show, then hosted by Jack Paar. As his popularity grew, so did his activism. In 1967, Dick Gregory ran for mayor of Chicago against the infamous Richard Daley. He was a close friend of the Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr. And in 1968, Dick Gregory ran for president against Richard Nixon. He also became well known for his hunger strikes for justice. In 1967, Dick Gregory began a public fast starting Thanksgiving Day to protest the war in Vietnam. 40 days later, he broke his fast with a hearty glass of fruit juice. He weighed 97 pounds. In the summer of 1968, he fasted for 45 days as a show of solidarity with Native Americans. The following summer, he did another 45-day fast in protest of de facto segregation in the Chicago public schools. In 1970, Gregory went 81 days without food to bring attention to the drug problem in America. Beginning in 1971, he went nearly 3 years without solid food, again to protest the war. During that fast, he ran 900 miles from Chicago to Washington, D.C. During the Iran hostage crisis, Dick Gregory traveled to Tehran in an effort to free the hostages and traveled to the north of Ireland to advise hunger-striking IRA prisoners. In his campaign against hunger, he traveled to Ethiopia more than 10 times. More recently, his face appeared in newspapers across the country for his community action approach to investigate allegations behind CIA connection with drugs in the African-American community. He camped out in dealer-ridden public parks and rallied community leaders to shut down head shops. He protested at CIA headquarters and was arrested. Throughout his life, Dick Gregory has been a target of FBI and police surveillance, and he was virtually banned from the entertainment arena for his political activism. Well, Saturday's 6-hour celebration of Dick Gregory featured passionate speeches and musical tributes. The program booklet also included letters from former President Barack Obama, the National Newspaper Publishers Association, the NAACP, and the Congressional Black Caucus. We turn now to some of those who gathered to remember Dick Gregory. We hear from the children of the legends, Martin Luther King Jr., Richard Pryor, Malcolm X, and Medgar Evers, their children. We'll also hear from Congressmember Maxine Waters. We begin with Reverend William Barber, President and Senior Lecturer of Repairers of the Breach.
To anyone who thinks injustice is final, the joke's on you. Psalm 37, 12, and 13 says, "The wicked plot against the godly. They snarl at them in defiance, but the Lord just laughs. For he sees their day of judgment coming." Dick Gregory knew this. He was a free man, never lost his humanity. He was a political and comedic satirist of the highest order. A run writer said that humorous activist Dick Gregory was a man of many words whose fighting spirit helped transform America. He was known for his off-the-cuff, no-holds-barred humor. He could captivate any crowd with his cool but passionate demeanor. He said that he openly refused to shy away from stinging subjects, but often reminded people that humor was not enough. It was a vehicle, but not enough. He said humor can no more find a solution to race problems than it can cure cancer. "We didn't laugh Hitler out of existence," he once said. In a time when dissenting opinion, this writer said, on race and discrimination could put a literal target on your back, Gregory wasn't just peddling funny. He said it like he saw it, but then he did it, marching for voting rights, performing at benefits for civil rights groups. He was even shot in the leg while serving as a peacemaker during the 1965 Watts riots in Los Angeles. I love that. Gregory once said about racism, Mother Gregory, he said, "A whole lots of Americans got that attitude, and we tolerate it because you can hide your feeling behind policies. That's why we got to work to flush this whole thing out." Gregory understood that racism was far more than whether or not you had a black friend. His laughter was a battle cry. His jokes were not merely for entertainment and money, but for empowerment and movement building. His laughter and his comedy was a bold critique. His satire was fearless and bold as he challenged America's original sins of genocide and racism and war. He boldly went where other comedians refused to go. But his comedy was not only a battle cry and a bold critique. His comedy and his laughter was a balm in Gilead. It helped to heal the wounds and the soul scars of slavery, Jim Crow, the wounds caused by the violent vestiges and dehumanizations of racism and poverty and war. His comedy helped us live through and make it through the psychic trauma. He was a genius. He was brilliant. His comedy was not mere buffoonery. It gave us backbone. And when you listen to Dick Gregory's comedy, you were not hearing a performer, but a prophet. You know, the prophets of the Bible were political satirists. When Jeremiah put an iron yoke around his neck to show the nation how foolish it was to do wrong, he was being a comedic satirist. It was comedic. It was satirical genius. When Jesus said to the hypocrites of his day, when you try to be religious on the outside, but you hurt people on the inside, it's just like having graves that you make real white, but inside of them, they're full of dead men's bones. When Jesus in his day said to the hypocrites, you try to be religious, but you leave undone love, mercy, and justice. That's comedic genius. And Dick Gregory was prophetic. In fact, I want to channel my inner Dick Gregory. If Dick was commenting today, he might just say, you know, the president kissed black babies in Texas the other day. And some say he's not a racist or a white supremacist. Well, Dick might say, we don't need to remember the Alamo, we need to remember the Okido. Because when you kiss a black baby in Texas while you're trying to take babies' health care in D.C., when you kiss a black baby in Texas but you're stealing their voting rights in D.C., when you kiss a baby or a brown baby in Texas but you're stealing their immigrant rights in D.C., that is the Okido. Or if I was to channel my inner Dick Gregory, I can hear him saying to some parts of white America, we poor black folk and white folks is better come together and stop voting for these people lying to you about tax cuts and this extremism. When all they're gonna do is give more tax cuts to the greedy, you better learn how to work with black folks and brown folks, because when they get all your money and give it to the corporation and you lose your jobs and can't pay your light bill, just remember, we all black in the dark. I'm just saying. Dick Gregory's comedy was prophetic. It cut to the truth, challenged lies, exposed racism as a form of societal insanity, and made a fool of Jim Crow. He wasn't performing, y'all. He was preaching. He made you want to leave the comedy club and get in the fight for justice.
When our mothers and fathers decide to change the world, and they do, their places in history are cemented, and they're among our most honored and revered legends. Picking up the mantle to continue the fight for justice are the children of the waymakers and freedom fighters we hold so dear. So please put your hands together to welcome Rain Pryor, the daughter of Richard Pryor.
I am honored to be here and share in this day of celebration of our newest ancestor, Baba Dick Gregory. I remember the first 3 books my father ever gave me: Revolutionary Suicide, Huey P. Newton, Malcolm X, and Nigger. I was to read them and understand them well. Today I can feel the ashe of our ancestors. I can feel the ashe of his family. I can feel the ashe of all the admirers that are here. Baba Dick Gregory, prolific activist, wielding truth like kings wield swords. His words poignant, funny, painful, awakening, joyous, like that of ancient griots who float on ancestral drums, heard in the rhythm of our hearts. Baba Gregory was a part of my prior life. Since I was old enough to understand and listen with a whole heart to the stories that made our eyes water and our sides split from masterful and master-filled lips that poured out truth libations. Truths that were soul food, truths that were a map so we could live by their words. Baba Gregory would tell me, drink truth wisely. to choose your words like the great ancestral wordsmiths without getting drunk on its lies, told about us and told about them. Be who you say. It don't matter what the theys have to say. Be your purity. So today, as we honor our newest iconic ancestor and stand with the Gregory family, let us all remember what the real meaning of carrying the legacy means. Carrying the legacy is not for us to become, it's not for us to morph into, it's not for us to imitate their greatness. The legacy is to always speak our highest truth and become better than their greatness, better than what they carved out, etched, and breathed into this life. It is to recall their spirit and those of the ancestors and keep them lifted in our actions as we become the change they sought, as we become the words that they wrote. Legacy is what runs through our veins and every manifestation that we touch. As Baba would have wanted, let us celebrate and raise up his living legacies so that they can keep growing their wings. And as we say in my tradition, when magic touches both earth and sky, Asheo.
Rena Evers, daughter of Medgar Evers.
Though they were not blood brothers, my father and Dick Gregory were brothers of the spiritual part. That's right. They connected on the intellectual level. They connected emotionally, especially when he came to our home in Jackson, Mississippi. And welcome back, Mark, if you ever go back to Jackson. I remember the times of heated discussions and peals of laughter, because my father had a wicked sense of humor. And Dick Gregory brought out every wicked strain he had. And I just remember there was one time that they had a heated discussion over the N-word and where it was appropriate and how to use it and how to own it or disown it. I found out later in my 20s when at one function that we attended with Dick Gregory, he came up to me and said, "Girl," I said, I'm here. Come here, sit down. Yes, sir, sit down, come here. Y'all just leave us alone, because other people were around. And he said, "I want to tell you about your dad. And I want to tell you the promise I made him. I'm your godfather." And I said, "What?" He said, "I promised him I would protect you and I would help you move up in life." And that's not moving up financially, that's spiritual. That's understanding what humanity's all about. So I have special memories of laughter, but always of knowledge. Always of feeling from the heart, determination to make things right.
Martin Luther King III, the son of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
He's been a friend really to a lot of us, but he was a mentor to me, like a father figure. Having lost my father at 10 years old, not having an opportunity to have adult conversations, but having the opportunity to have many with Dick Gregory. Many of those words, those deeds, I will never forget. I think it's very interesting that when Dick Gregory transitioned on that day in August, that on that same day in the state where his children were raised and my wife lives in Massachusetts, There was the largest demonstration for peace and justice and human rights on the day that he went home to live with God. I think it's very interesting that just yesterday in the city of St. Louis, where Dick Gregory was born, that there were protesters protesting about the death of an African American who had been killed by police. And what probably went unnoticed was most of those protesters were white Americans. Even they realized that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Eliasa Shabazz, the daughter of Malcolm X.
On behalf of my 5 sisters, I am humbled and honored to be here with you on this special day as we celebrate the life of this extraordinary man, Baba Dick Gregory. Much like our fathers, Dick Gregory stood up to the power structure to reclaim truth and justice for his people. And when it was time to clarify who took Brother Malcolm's life, it was Dick Gregory who rose to the occasion. And when it was time to clarify who assassinated Dr. Martin Luther King, it was Dick Gregory who rose to the occasion. He raised his voice for Malcolm and Dr. King and Medgar Evers and all of the others who were slain by bullies, by bigots, because they could not do so for themselves. When this new generation of powerful voices reminded the world that Black lives matter, it was yet again Baba Dick Gregory who stood by them and spoke truth to power, whether you liked him or not. We know that Dick Gregory was a comedian, an intellectual, and we know that he was funny. But what was so extraordinary about him is his willingness to share a story, but not just any story, an engaging story that informs, entertains, and empowers his listeners. It was his ability to criticize us because he loved us. And like my father, he saw himself in us, misinformed and miseducated. And so shortly after my mother passed away in 1997, my sisters and I attended a gathering with distinctive African-American leaders, Maya Angelou, Aunt Coretta, Dick Gregory, amongst them. And I was sitting quiet, and Dick Gregory came over to me and started talking. He said, "Ilyasa, have I ever told you about my magic glasses?" He said, "One day I was just walking in the forest, minding my own goddamn business, and I saw something glistening in the grass. So I bent down to get a closer look, and it looked like magic. It was a pair of glasses that illuminated light. But before I could touch these eyeglasses," he said, "a spirit surrounded me. And the spirit said, 'Dick, don't pick up those glasses. Because if you do, you'll see images that'll consume you. Pains and injustices your stomach will not contain. Your heart will pound through your head, and there'll be no turning back. Criminal sins of injustice committed against humanity.' It said, looking through these glasses will change the course of your career and require you to act and share the gospel." Dick Gregory explained that meeting my father acted as a lens which identified what he could do in this quest. You see, before Malcolm's life was taken from us, he said at the heart of our plight was not race, but economic injustice. And Dick Gregory said, we must ensure the economic system is just and fair, or the masses of our people will continue to remain trapped and lingering on the periphery of economic justice and opportunity.
The inimitable Congresswoman Maxine Waters.
We're all here to celebrate Dick's life and to pay tribute to his extraordinary contributions, not only to his family and his friends, but to our society, to this country, to the world. And today, you have all heard over and over again about all of his tremendous and awesome talent. You've heard about his genius. You've heard, of course, and you know about his civil rights advocacy, his politics, his humor, his wisdom, vision, and uncanny ability to dissect personalities, events, national and international problems and occurrences. I have sat with Dick for hours, and he would come with stacks of newspapers from all over the world. And we would talk, no, he would talk. And I would listen. And he would explain to me what was really going on in the world in his own fashion. And he taught me to look twice at people. He taught me to pay attention because he said, you can't always pay attention to what they say. It's what they do. And so I listened, I paid attention, and because of that, it has brought me to a time and place in my life where I've taken off the gloves. I've decided that I have no fear. I've decided that I don't want to be safe. I'm not looking for who likes me and who does not like me. It's time for all of us to walk in the walk of Dick Gregory. Did you like him? Did you love him? Did you care about him? If you liked him, if you loved him, if you care about him, you gotta stop being weak. You gotta stop speaking that which you don't mean. You've got to stop skinning and grinning. It's time to stand up and deal with the problems of this country.
Congressmember Maxine Waters speaking Saturday at the City of Praise Family Ministries in Landover, Maryland, as she addressed thousands, among so many others, at the celebration of the life of legendary comedian and human rights activist Dick Gregory, who passed away on August 19th at the age of 84. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org. Among those who honored him, Stevie Wonder.
And the rosebuds of the bloom in early May. Just as hate knows love's cure, you can rest your mind assured that I'll be loving you always. As now can't reveal the mystery of tomorrow, but in passing we'll grow older every day. Just as all that's fun is new, to know what I say is true, that I'll be loving you always. Until the rainbow burns the stars out in the sky. Always. Until the ocean covers every mountain high.
Stevie Wonder singing at Dick Gregory's celebration of life last Saturday. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Amidst tensions over North Korea's nuclear and missile tests, President Donald Trump told the UN General Assembly Tuesday the United States would totally destroy North Korea, a country of 25 million people. Then on Wednesday, 51 countries signed a new treaty that would ban nuclear weapons. The United Nations calls it the world's first legally binding treaty banning nuclear weapons weapons. It prohibits the development, testing, and possession of nuclear weapons, as well as using or threatening to use these weapons. The treaty is set to take effect 90 days after it is ratified. It was first adopted in July by 122 UN member states. Despite heavy U.S. opposition, none of the 9 countries that possess nuclear weapons signed the measure. Those countries are the United States, Russia, Britain, China, France, India, Pakistan, North Korea, and Israel. For more, we're joined by Susie Snyder, Nuclear Disarmament Program Manager for the Netherlands-based group PAX and author of the report Don't Bank on Bomb. Welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you very much.
Talk about what happened this week at the UN.
So this week, 50 countries said we ultimately reject nuclear weapons. We find them completely illegitimate, and we are willing to sign the first treaty that makes them totally illegal. And this is the first 50. There are 42 in an hour. And it's the first time that nuclear weapons are categorically prohibited. This is new, and it is an effective measure that responsible countries are taking to make sure to reduce nuclear dangers.
So what does it mean exactly? What does it mean to adopt it and now to sign it, and what happens with ratification?
Right. So every country has a ratification process that's a little different. So it means adopting this treaty as part of your national law. Now, there's already 115 countries that have rejected nuclear weapons in regional agreements, and we expect that a lot of those are going to be able to ratify very quickly. All the way through this process, countries have been condemning nuclear weapons because their inhumane, catastrophic effect, and this is a humanitarian treaty that's rooted in international humanitarian law, the law of war, saying nuclear weapons can't be possessed or used, or even the threat of nuclear weapons is illegal. And that's a very positive step for us. So we'll see 50 ratifications in the coming year or so, and then the treaty will enter into force.
So what does it mean that the nuclear countries, none of them participated?
Yeah, well, it's really unfortunate, especially since 5 of them are required by the Non-Proliferation Treaty to negotiate nuclear disarmament. They did not do that, and they're missing an opportunity. The countries that led this process recognize that it's the impact of nuclear weapons that we need to talk about, them as weapons, not as tools. And that is what reframed the debate, it reframed the discussion, and the impact it'll have on the nuclear-armed states is that we're strengthening a norm, and we're making their weapons illegitimate, and that has led historically to disarmament.
You're author of Don't Bank on Bomb. What's this campaign?
Don't Bank on the Bomb works with the financial sector to stop investment in nuclear weapon-producing companies. And we had a great announcement from Amalgamated Bank here in New York on the day of the signing that said, hey, we don't have any investment in nuclear weapon producers because we find it illegitimate. And that's the first U.S. bank that we know of that's made such an announcement. This is one of the things that's going to have a big impact on making sure that the production of weapons, of these nuclear weapons, stops.
And when you talk about we, who are the forces behind this nuclear ban?
Well, it's been a coalition of non-governmental organizations through the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. Governments, it's been about 120 governments that have really been emphatic about this, and the International Committee of the Red Cross and Red Crescent, who have talked about the humanitarian consequences of this weapon, and that's what we need to keep our focus on.
And what about the fact this is happening when President Trump is threatening to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal, as well as threatening the country of North Korea?
Yeah, that's deplorable, to be perfectly honest. That type of activity is what this treaty seeks to end. And the Iran deal it's a good deal. It stopped the Iranian nuclear program. The activities of North Korea there should have been a negotiation directly with North Korea to make a similar deal, and we missed that opportunity. There needs to be direct negotiations so that we don't get into war.
I want to thank you, Susie Snyder, for joining us, Nuclear Disarmament Program Manager for the group PAX, based in the Netherlands, author of the report Don't Bank on the Bomb. And that does it for our broadcast. Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez will be speaking next Friday, September 29th, in Kansas City. I'll be speaking that night as well in Winnipeg, Canada. On Saturday, September 30th, Juan is speaking at University of Maryland College Park. I'll be speaking in Halifax, Nova Scotia in Canada. Then Sunday, October 11th, I'll be speaking at the University of Guelph in Guelph. That is October 1st in Ontario. That same night at Ryerson University in Toronto. You can check our website for details. To see our website, podcast, video and audio, and transcripts of every show, go to democracynow.org. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Dina Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdiener, Sam Alkoff, John Hamilton, Robbie Karen, Hani Masood, Sharina Nadura, Amel Ahmed, Nat Needham, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, Paul Huckabee, our engineers. Special thanks to Becca Staley, Julie Crosby. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.